right, welcome to another episode of Omega Matters. This is a Be Our Guest episode where we talk to people that we work with who actually are testing omega-3s in real people and telling us how it's going. So today we have Dr. Annette Bosworth. We have called Dr. Boz, and we have worked with her for many years, and we're so excited to have you on to talk about how you use the testing and a little bit about yourself. So thank you for coming on.
Well, Kristina, it's great to see you again, and it is
Mhm.
a privilege to be asked to be on your show and part of your company. I often brag about how much your company has benefited my patients and my ability to, cut the chase,
Mhm.
try to turn into the spin for folks who never want to, touch a statin again and never want to look at an
Mhm.
LDL cholesterol. But we still got to talk about the truth of how we help you get better. And
Yeah.
we need more folks doing what you guys do, which is
Yeah.
take care of a problem, do it in a really great way, and then
Mhm.
be the little guy that exceeds expectations. It's been amazing to work with your company. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's so great to work with and talk to clinicians
Ooh.
who have a much broader view of what's going on with health than we do. We get pretty narrow and focused in the omegas, but then we can give our learnings to you and you can actually use it. And that is the best
Yeah,
thing
right.
that's the whole point. So can you quickly give us an overview of what you do and how you work with
Right. Well,
patients?
so I grew up in South Dakota, where you are right now,
Mm-hmm.
and where I was for the first 50 years of my life. And that entrance. Oh, and there is one of my favorite people.
Oh,
I was
stop.
There he
about to brag
is.
about
Stop.
you. Uh, So
It's
when I was
close on the
applying to medical school, they ask you, who are, do you have a letter of recommendation? Do you have anybody that you know that's a doctor? And I'm like, I had one doctor that in Wessington Springs, South Dakota that I knew.
Oh, wow.
And as I'm applying to medical school, I really had very little idea of what I was saying yes to. But
Mhm.
much of that traditional education and, I think we got some of the best education possible in South Dakota. Yankton, South Dakota was where I did some of
Mhm.
that medical school training that is just an excellent way to say it is your responsibility from this point forward to research and be able to answer the questions as the science evolves. So
Mhm.
I head off to answer the hardest questions, which turned out to be internal medicine. And I did that training in Salt Lake City, Utah. Again, another place where we
Mhm.
were able to use data in real time in a clinic to say, how are you doing taking care of that patient?
Mhm.
And as I brought those skills back to South Dakota, I practiced in the city of Sioux Falls and worked with the University of South Dakota School of Medicine. I found it incredibly challenging because as you are on the front line saying it's my job to know the science and be able to answer the questions and try to take care of whatever protocols an internal medicine patient is presenting with.
Mhm.
The other part of this is you still have to sell the patient on doing what's the right thing. Like there's a salesman part of being a physician, and
Mhm.
I used to snub at my husband that I'm not a salesman. I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
But what you're really doing in front of that patient is so you can research the answer, you can have an understanding of the science, but if you can't convince the patient that the next 5 steps are gonna be worth the impact, that you're
Mhm.
gonna have to say no to something, you're gonna have to struggle through things, you're gonna have to, maybe taste a sardine or something that's you weren't
Yeah.
raised
Yeah.
on. And then that there's evidence behind it in a way that they can connect the dots and believe you.
Mhm.
Well, you might go crazy being in medicine if you can't find a way to communicate that's attractive to a patient. So
Yeah.
my career has been in internal medicine. When I thought I was going to be an ICU doctor. I thought that was the place where the patients were
Mhm.
intubated first of all, and
Yes. Complete control.
right. There was a really great group of thinkers standing around making decisions in a way that I just loved watching and being part of how to do it better each day. But in my third year residency, I had a baby and said, who the heck's going to raise this if I go in that world? So I took all that to
Yes.
outpatient medicine, no regrets,
Uh-huh.
but my analytical desire. I said yes to the first job was in Salt Lake City, Utah. And
Mhm.
it was outpatient only. I was a bunch of Mormon men who were my partners, and I was taking over the practice of an older Mormon man who was retiring. And about 3 months in, I could not believe how many women were depressed, so I started screening for depression, that you're gonna get
Yeah.
checked in from the front desk with a blood pressure, cholesterol, review your meds, and we're gonna do this 9 questionnaire for depression, and I was in the high 300s of number of times I'd screened a patient. We're at least 10 months into, 9 to 10 months into this new practice before I
Mhm.
got one that was not moderate or severely depressed.
My gosh.
Oh my
So
gosh.
the my career
Wow.
path really took off in saying, what's the peak, how do we help patients' brains get better? And this really came from, this was at the advent of pay for performance. You might have heard that term for physicians bastardized, that they're going to pay you for the generic prescriptions. They're going to pay you for
Mm.
how many of your statins are generic, or your Prozac is generic.
No.
But
Hmm.
the original pay for performance was, of the people that you're in charge of, what's their hemoglobin A1C and have you improved it? What's their body mass index and is that controlled? What's their blood pressure? So these were metrics of how
Yeah.
well were you taking care of this panel of people. And it was an internal report, not to go out to
Huh.
insurance companies. And of course, they had really good human psychology that they put you on a list of your partners. So I enter
Yeah.
into this really seasoned practice. I'm taking over this practice from this retiring physician. And the first report comes out, and I'm stacked up against my colleagues, and probably about, I think there was like 50 doctors on this. And I
Mhm.
was like the worst one. My patient panel had the worst A1C, the worst blood
Yeah.
pressure. And so I'm like, well, I'm a little
That's
competitive.
not gonna work. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I start this process saying, well, in the ICU, we would protocol this. And we would put you
Mhm.
on a protocol, and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And I don't care if you're not coming into the office and I don't get paid. We're going to top this list, dang it. And so we started out unconventional, sending handwritten letters to patients saying, I'm your new doctor. This is what we're trying to reach for. We really need you checking your blood pressure at home. And if it's not normal, you need to call the nurse, not come in. We're going to change things before you see me. We're going to control blood pressure. We're going to control
Yeah.
metrics. And of course, at the same time, I'm screening all these depressed women.
Mhm.
Unbeknownst to me, Salt Lake City, Utah was the #1 female depressed market in the country. And I have lots
Oh
of
my.
reasons why that might have been,
Oh.
but I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I remember coming home, it's probably about 4 or 5 months into practice, and saying to my husband, "I just think I want an intubated one again."
This
'Cause
part's
it wasn't
yeah,
something you're really trained for, and if
yeah.
you're trying to get their blood pressure better and they're depressed, so then you start to turn into
Huh.
the spin of, well, how could you really get this audience of people better? What am I gonna sell them? What do I
Mhm.
have to do to convince them to change a few things? And then
Mhm.
can I prove it? Can I prove that if you lean in and you work with me on this, you're gonna feel better? And it
Mhm.
turned out mental health was the fastest thing to improve. They didn't care
Mm.
about their blood pressure. They didn't care about their hemoglobin A1C. They cared
Yeah,
about how they felt.
yeah.
So this began as I was, regular internal medicine, really leaning into peak brain performance and what can we do with that. And you don't get very far along that line without knowing that, well, omega-3 should be consumed, taken consistently. And, at this time, I
Yeah.
didn't have a way to measure it.
Mhm.
But dang, if you think it's hard to get folks in South Dakota to eat those little fish out of a can,
So
you try the ones in Salt Lake City, it was even
I
worse.
mean
So, my career really has started out in Salt Lake, but it had that, it was great for me, honestly. This was really feeding my personality, that you were gonna compare me to my colleagues on how to strategically work on this list of patients that called me their doctor, and how do we move the needle? Not how,
Mhm.
if you topped the list, I think you got paid like 3 cents better per RVU,
Right,
something really ridiculous. It wasn't
right.
worth the money.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah.
the status symbol of being the number 1 at the
Whoa.
top.
Yeah,
And and I like
yeah.
that. I like that.
That's
So that
great.
started a career along the way of being good at internal medicine, but also really finding the things where you could make a difference, move a needle, and the patient's return for how they were doing that, what they were doing really made a difference. And
Mhm.
um, Yeah, I when I moved back to Salt Lake City or moved back to South Dakota, joined the left the University of Utah, and now I was at University of South Dakota School of Medicine,
Uh-huh.
and really found the same strategies that I was trying to apply to the patients there, in a different culture, in a different world, but
Mhm.
that the patients were still the same. If you started focusing on the things that the new corporation said you should pay attention to this and you should pay attention to this and you should pay attention to this, doesn't matter if the patient doesn't feel better and if the patient
Yeah.
isn't, really collaborating in on what can we do to help you feel better. By the way, you're going to die
Yeah.
quicker if you don't take care of these other things.
Yeah.
Uh,
But that's so much more abstract than your day-to-day life.
yeah.
So I think that's really important what you're saying.
Yeah. So I think it was the right path for me to end up in a role of internal medicine where there's lots of hard problems to solve. But
Mhm.
I also blame the comfort of being from a town of 800 people, where I started kindergarten with 21 kids. I graduated with the same 21 kids. I know their parents, their grandparents. We knew
Yeah.
which lady was sleeping with the neighbor and which one was sleeping with the preacher. This is a small town USA, and you learned, don't
Yeah.
judge them. Be in their life and be the grace
Mhm.
God has put you here
Mhm.
to be. But it's comfortable to be in an intimate relationship with patients, and I really think, have had I not had that desire to really be, to know my patients and to have that, back and forth, that you would have never reached these goals of how do get some top award and get sent to the White House. You don't get that without
Mhm.
patients really wanting, to be in that relationship well, to feel like they're cared for. And
Mhm.
I think South Dakota makes the best doctors because of that.
That's amazing. I haven't heard that full story,
Oh,
and it really is a great journey, and I think that's and then so now
yeah.
you
So
have your own practice. You're no longer in South Dakota, but you're where a lot of South Dakotans end up,
yeah, amen.
which is Florida.
So, yeah, 50 years in South Dakota, and COVID, was a year of death for me. My
Mhm.
dad was on, peritoneal dialysis, that
Oh.
year, and my mom did the dialysis. So you peritoneal dialysis, you don't have to go into the
Mm.
dialysis center. You can do them at home overnight. And so they were do-it-yourselfers. If this worked well, and those years of pesticides, I think, was probably the
Mm.
cause for his proteinuria and his demise eventually. So we also go to see my son, who's a freshman in college, living in Hawaii, where South Dakota and Hawaii have reciprocity, so he was
Oh, is that
in-state
right?
tuition. Yeah, what senator did that? Uh,
Interesting. Yeah.
and as we went to see him, we had never taken our family to Hawaii, so on March 8th, 2020, we landed in Hawaii, and
Oh my gosh.
our family did not get out of Hawaii for 93 days.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
Oh my
you
gosh.
cannot see a patient even through Zoom if you're not in the state that you're licensed.
Yeah.
So as my private practice at the time had no
Yeah.
nurse practitioners, no other providers, I now had a problem, and the
Mhm.
staff that could much better do their job for hospitals that were paying big money for their skill sets. And I mean, at first we thought
Mhm.
it's been a week, it's been 2 weeks, and then we looked at
Yeah.
how we might get home. Uh, it's a lottery system. I am not going to send my
Oh my
teenagers one lottery at a
gosh.
time back to South Dakota.
Yeah.
And anyway, so by the time we got
Wild.
home, 8 day we were still in quarantine. 8 days later, my dad died.
Mm.
And 4 months to the day later, my mother died. In that whole
Ugh.
mess, my private practice died. And
Ugh.
and my husband said, "Can we move now?"
Yep.
I said, Never a better time." So
Wow.
yeah. So we left South Dakota at a time where death
Mhm.
was in our wake, and the reset
Mhm.
was not was welcome. So I moved
Mhm.
to Florida. I have a private practice here, but we moved during COVID, and that private practice needed some paperwork from the federal government, and the federal
Mhm.
government people were not there. So what
Yeah.
should have taken about 4 months of really paperwork back and forth took almost 18 months. So
Oh
in the
my word.
meantime, I solved a problem in my private practice in 2012 that I thought was brilliant. And that is,
Mhm.
if you're going to take care of a broken brain, you're going to start with fixing their sleep. But
Mhm.
nobody can fix sleep unless they, do some steps. And when they can't remember and they're depressed and they really want to lose weight,
Mhm.
those rules of how to fix sleep, it's like Groundhog's Day. You would keep saying the same thing over and over again. So
Mhm.
I had given sleep lectures across the country, and I finally put a sleep lecture, my favorite sleep lecture, on YouTube, and it had a handout in it that was like the third grade, or like, how preachers leave blanks in the notes when
Yeah.
you go to church. It was like it had a
Fill in
handout,
the blank.
fill in the blank. We are not talking about the sleep problem again until you watch this lecture and you filled in the
Yeah.
blanks. And if you come to the next appointment and you haven't done that, I'm going to sit you in the waiting room and we're going to do it that way because I am so tired of telling you the same thing. I can't go to step 2 until you do step 1. And this really started this online education process of I
Mhm.
need my patients to go to a place because insurance is not going to pay me to tell you this again. It would take an hour. And clearly, you're not
Mhm.
recording memory. So
Yeah.
um, YouTube became a solution for me. So when I um, landed in Florida, I had this space where I could really pour into that part of what had turned
Mhm.
into a business of how can you educate people with every lawyer saying this is not medical advice, this is truly education on how to improve your health.
Mhm.
And the YouTube channel had really took off in part because of a book that I had written and another
Mhm.
book that I had written, but mainly because when you're looking at something where you come to a doctor to say, how can I lose weight? How can I feel better? And a lot of those things that, the patients back in Salt Lake City, Utah, were not going to care about the things that I wanted them to. We had to help them feel better. So
Yeah.
when you say, come to me and I'll teach you how to do that, your insurance says, did you
Right.
take care of a prescription medication? Did
Right.
you order a lab? And if you didn't do
Right.
any of that stuff this time, I'm not paying you. Or I'm going to pay you worse than a therapist.
Uh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so you learned to do this in a place where they still needed the level of education that I think clinicians have, especially if you've been
Mhm.
seasoned. Um, and so it became this great partnership to use YouTube to help my patients. And
Mhm.
then lo and behold, other patients wanted to learn that.
Mhm.
So when I
Yeah.
was waiting for that paperwork from the federal government, the channel blew up, and I did something that I'd been dreaming about for a long time, and had God gotten me that paperwork before this moment, I would have never done it. But we're at a
Yeah.
tipping point where, you still have payroll to pay, and I've gone through a bunch of
Yeah.
savings waiting for this, clinic to open, and I've always wanted to teach in real time, um, well, specifically an advanced ketogenic diet to a group of patients
Mhm.
Yeah.
because they come to me one on one. Their appointments are 3 to 4 months apart. They don't remember what they learned last time. And
Mhm.
it's the same questions that you could have
Yes.
gotten from the book, you could have gotten from an online course, you could have
Yeah.
gotten from my YouTube channel, but
Yeah.
their brains are not healthy enough to connect all those dots on their own. And
Mhm.
so I said, I want to do an online course that is the 3-week protocol I use if somebody comes to me and wants to learn how to do a ketogenic diet for seizures, for
Mhm.
if they're going through cancer treatment and they're trying to be in a state of ketosis for enduring the chemotherapy better, the radiation, or even
Mhm.
just healing better. Or any other of the brain disorders that I had worked on, saying, yes, we can help you with that, but you're going to have a far superior outcome if you're in an advanced state of ketosis. I don't mean you're buying keto from something on aisle 3. You're
Right.
actually producing ketones every day, lowering that
Mhm.
blood sugar and having the outcomes.
Yeah.
So I did the course, and it was not fake advertising where I said, this might be the only time I ever do this, but I have to try this.
Yeah.
So I charged $2,000 a seat, took 200 students for a 3-week course, and it was brilliant. It was
Yeah.
just brilliant on what those patients were able to change in their health because they weren't forever addicted to me. They had the information, and at the end, they were in a small group of small groups
Mhm.
that we had in that class that learned the same information.
Mhm.
And I mean, I've analyzed this a few different times. that it would have taken me 3 to 4 years of seeing that patient one-on-one to
Mhm.
transfer the information and the changed behavior that we got in 3 weeks of that. It's an online course because they are on Zoom, but it's a live course where you show
Okay.
up and then you are in a small group, 1 hour a day, Monday through Friday for 3 weeks, and it's brilliant. It's my favorite thing to do that yeah, you might need a physician to teach you some of this, but, you shouldn't try to go to the doctor one-on-one to learn to do a ketogenic diet.
Mhm.
And, it's just been a great blessing to say the transformation of I do it twice a year because it's exhausting,
Okay.
but it is
Just yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
it is
and you can't
it's
record
really
it
where you
per
get
se. Yeah.
yeah, so, um, the twice I do it right after Labor Day and then right after, President's Day in January,
Yeah.
and, um, it's
Those are the right
probably
times.
it's by far I could do this until I die because it's
Yeah.
that rewarding and it's just transformational to watch people say, "No, you have to change how you eat."
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
Mhm.
and just to have the relational piece along with kind of the efficiency and the education, it all just
Mhm.
comes together. And what I'm also we mentioned, it's like it's not the keto that you get sold. You actually are testing people's
Yeah.
levels every day.
Yeah.
So f and so you have people do what do you have them do for the ketogenesis
Right, so
to make sure they're in it?
we use a little monitor, this Keto Mojo, which hooks up to a dashboard, and we have them check their
Uh-huh,
morning fasting blood sugar and their morning
uh-huh.
fasting ketones every morning, and,
Mhm.
pulling off of the 20 years of how do you change people's behavior, we use positive peer pressure, where you log
Yeah,
onto a dashboard and you see your numbers
yeah,
along with everybody else's in your classroom. So,
yeah,
just like I was gonna change that I was the worst doctor
yeah.
in that group, they now
Yeah,
wanna be the worst blood sugar in that group, or
yeah.
somebody who, you eat late at night, well, we're all gonna see it in the
Mm,
morning. You can't
yeah,
fake your numbers into this dashboard. You have to put blood on the strip.
right.
So unless you're gonna steal it from your
Yes.
spouse,
Yeah,
in order to
yeah,
get it to look better, you have to change the behavior, and
yeah.
it's just been, positive peer pressure in a small group of people who are really leaning
Mhm,
in to improve themselves.
mhm.
We start out the first week getting, goals set, hooking them up to that dashboard. And then on Friday, we introduced that there is a major challenge that they're going to do together. And that is starting on Sunday, we're going to do a 72-hour challenge where the only thing you eat is sardines.
Really?
Oh my
Wow.
gosh. It's like aversion therapy. It's
Oh,
like, you're
Wow.
just you're gonna find out.
Yeah,
and
You won't die.
why
amen.
sardines?
Right. Well, why sardines?
Oh.
First of all, it's one of those nutrient dense foods.
Yeah,
One of the best things to so who's the audience of people taking this is they're severely insulin resistant patients. And it's
yeah.
almost like when you've been in internal medicine so much, you don't even realize what a non-insulin resistant patient looks
Mhm.
like anymore because everybody's
Right,
insulin resistant, right?
right.
But if they're coming to see me for this, expensive and intense course, what they are expecting is that we can lower their blood sugar. And of course, when you lower the blood sugar, the insulin lowers and now you can raise ketones.
Mhm,
However, if you've got that high insulin, your fat is trapped inside your fat cells
mhm.
and it doesn't necessarily come out for a while. But if you swallow the fat, you will flip those into ketones. So we see that blood sugar lower and the ketones raise and we see a metabolic burst in those 3 days. We have some specific rules because, well, they're humans who don't wanna eat sardines more than
Right.
anybody else does, but,
Mhm.
you can't start the timer every 72 hours until you take the first bite. Because we had people saying, "I'll just fast."
I'll fast for some
And I said,
Yeah,
"No, no, 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 you're insulin
that feels
resistant.
good.
Your
Yeah,
fat is in those cells, and
it's not
you're not
accessible.
gonna get them right
Yeah.
now. If I charge your body with ketones, guess what happens on day 4? Is now you've got the chemistry set that is unlocking some of those resources. We are losing weight,
Mhm.
and it's not just water weight. We are when we have DEXA scans and we,
Mm.
watch to see how not everybody in the class gets one, that would be too
Right.
expensive, but, so you look at what happens when people eat a nutrient-dense food, and you say, "Well, why don't you use bacon and eggs, those are nutrient dense foods, because people
'Cause people
like the taste of those."
Right. It's like the perfect,
I
you
mean,
don't want to eat more, but it
mhm.
will satisfy.
What we are
That's
looking
so
for is
interesting.
how can you start
Yeah.
to recognize what is hunger, what is boredom,
Hmm.
and you live in a season of gluttony for 50 years that
Hmm.
it's so easy to get the resources of food, and when they consume that, they don't they don't even notice that the amount of food they eat.
Yeah.
Just that's this displacement for other emotions that should have been nurtured along the way.
Hmm.
Well, they
Hmm.
don't do that with sardines. Like we say, eat as much
Yeah.
as you want. There is no
Sure.
timer. You can eat in the middle of the night as
Yeah.
long as we don't have any other like sauces. You can put a little hot sauce on there, but like maybe a tiny
Yeah.
mustard, but no ketchup, no nothing with sugar in it,
No crack.
and it's just
Hmm.
sardines.
No.
And
Yeah. No carbs.
so
Yeah.
yeah, no
Yeah.
carbs, no carbs. And what
Yeah.
happens the first day is, you get some people eating 3 or 4 cans, and then the
Hmm.
next day you'll get them eating 3 cans. And then
Yeah.
the rules of the sardine challenge is they have to eat the final can on the 72nd hour. Because what we were having people
Okay.
do is they would fast up to the 72nd hour and then they would glutton out on anything else.
No.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
no, the
Sorry.
72nd hour is sardines.
They figure out every way to hack it.
Yeah, I had to
It's
make
like,
up these rules after they
I know.
did this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was powerful is, you'd get to that 3rd day, and they knew they had a can to eat at 72nd hour. You'd have them eating, like, a can of sardines, like, the lowest volume of food possible. And we have, like, what? So we've done the class 6 times now, 200 times 6, so, a good 1,000 patients, and you see these blood sugars come down, and you see these ketones rise, and especially
Hmm.
because that satiety is something they now are learning, what does it really feel like to have satiety? By that 3rd day, it's powerful, and
Hmm.
they usually aren't gluttonous if they've had that can of sardines. They want
Hmm.
they think they want chocolate cake, but much like, the 3rd week
Yeah.
on semaglutide, maximum
Yeah.
dose, they're like, "Yeah, I don't want any of
No.
that." There's a satiety it's a hormonal response. Those hormones are made of
Hmm.
fat, and your fat has been locked away for so long that even if I burst it to the minimum level of effectiveness in your body, that's 1,000 times higher than it's been for years. So
Hmm.
they get to that 3rd day and cannot believe their energy, their mental clarity, and their lack of desire for food.
Hmm.
Uh,
Ugh.
and of course, my favorite part is they wake up the next morning with the lowest blood sugar they've ever seen since they've been checking,
Yeah.
the highest ketone they've ever seen since they've been checking,
Wow.
and it transforms that food was never meant to be this pleasure center. It was meant to be sustainable, and
Mhm.
turns out humans have been eating those little fish for years and years and years.
Oh my
So how
gosh.
after
Yeah.
day 3, then what do you? And you can't do a 2-week course,
No,
but generally, so
it's
what
a
do you
great
eat?
question. So I get this all the time on YouTube. In fact, if I want to do a party trick right now, I just say when if my husband's around or somebody mentions that I'm on YouTube, I said just go type in the word sardines to Google.
Mhm.
Do you own that? Oh my gosh.
So I get the
We are
question
gonna
a
do
lot,
that.
Bill. Okay, the sardine challenge is over. What next? Um, well, I do look at their goals, like okay, but most of the people that are in there, I mean, they're 50, 60 years old. They've got 15 meds on their list. They're saying, I keep going to the doctor and all I get is more. How do I undo this? And so if they're really trying
Mhm.
to reverse medications, we want to we
Mhm.
want to keep them in that state of ketosis at least a season to reduce that fat mass, to reduce those cytokines, to diurese the
Mhm.
patient. I mean, all kinds of things that are happening when we can keep that blood sugar lower, the ketones higher. By this point, this is like 10 days into the course and it's a 21-day class. They know that, yes, I say 20 total carbohydrates per day is all you should be eating. You're not healthy. You're sick.
Mhm.
And even if you can't see you're sick, I'll show you what your blood sugars are going to do relative to your classmates in the next 10 days.
Mm.
And then you're going to see you ain't the best one in the room yet.
Mhm.
If you want to be, you have to stick with this set of rules until we reverse insulin resistance. And that takes a hot minute. You've been at it for a
Mhm.
decade.
Mhm.
So we talk about now they get by that 10th day that 20 total carbohydrates. Sometimes it's easier to have 0.
Yeah.
And we also know that if you can get, I've used this word too, 2 boluses of food, because I used to call
Mm.
them meals and then people would add snacks. And then I used to say a nibble and then they would,
Yeah.
so if there's 2 times during the day where you eat food,
Mhm.
we want those to be within maybe a 6-hour window. Like, try not to
Mm.
spread them out too far. Every time you eat, you make insulin,
Mhm.
not because you're eating carbs, but because you're eating, and that's what your body, an insulin resistant patient, does.
Mhm.
And when you put those 2 boluses of food too far apart, you just have a constant sense of high insulin. Even though
Mhm.
you've changed the eating, you're reduced from disaster area where you came in the door. But if you're trying to reverse medical problems, we got to
Mhm.
lower that even further. And so
Yeah.
then the second part, which is more challenging, sometimes folks don't accomplish this while they're in the class, but we have them take those 2 boluses of food and we move them more towards sunrise. I mean, you're going to raise insulin
Mm.
every morning when you wake up. That's part of a
Mhm.
natural part of our human cycle. Um, and if you don't eat them because you're, I'm going to put this in quotes, not hungry, um,
Mhm.
okay, that works for a while. But when you're insulin resistant, what you really care about is you don't eat after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You have this
Interesting.
extended time where there is a nothing burger, that it's far
Mhm.
before sunset, and that no stimulus of insulin, which is called nothing, is what you need
Yeah.
in order to really lower that production of insulin over the next several months. And so,
Mhm.
um,
Wow.
those foods are, you
Mhm.
know, yeah, frequently
Yeah.
not ones they love. Sardine,
Yeah.
yeah, another
Sardines are
rule
a
that I,
perfect
yeah,
example.
and it's a perfect example. And when people are struggling, I say, well, you can just put this new rule on your menu that you can have what you
Mhm.
want before noon, but after 1 o'clock, the only thing you can eat is sardines.
That's a good
So
hack.
what's
Yeah,
this do to
I
their
like that.
omega-3 index?
that is the fun
Mm.
part. Okay,
There we
so
go.
I've had a couple of coaches. So they've done this class with me 6 or 7 times, lost a bunch of weight, but had these chronic inflammatory problems. And I'll give them, care packages or gifts when when they coach for me. And of course,
Mhm.
one of the things I give them is omega 3s,
Yeah.
an omega 3 index. What's your number? And as you know, if they never eat fish, which is most people, and they don't take a supplement,
Right.
Mhm.
it's like 4.
Mhm.
It's like
Yeah.
really low, 4%. And then they do the sardine challenge and they think it's going to be super high. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Not in 3 days.
72, right?
Let me
And
do
it's like,
it. No.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you had a can for the first time in your life, but and
Right.
so then they'll do the challenge afterwards and it'll still be 4.
Yep. That's
And
correct.
right. So,
Yeah.
the first week of that class, we have some special lectures that we get preparing people, but the second and third week, we highlight cases.
Mhm.
I pick cases that I think will provide the most education to the audience, and I'll start with some basic ones, but I always put in there, what do you know about omega 3s? And it's great if they've ever tested one, but many times they haven't. And I talk about how, when you're eating this essential fat, it does this, it does this, it does this, and we go through those benefits. But the power of uh, expecting so you'll have a bunch of people order omega 3s while they're doing their little tests, and
Yeah.
they'll come back with the 3s, but they don't get the results until after the course is over. And you'll say, well, why didn't it go up?
Mhm.
And I just think it's one of those places where we get you feeling better, and you still now need to nourish the body with the kind um, uh, substances that are linked to that improved mental health, that decreased
Mhm.
cardiovascular risk. So I had one coach say, all right, I've taken this course, she's coached the course like 3 times. And she, at the end of the class, she said, I'm just going to keep eating sardines until I can't. And I said, if you're going to do that, do your omega 3 at the beginning. And her omega 3 was something like, I don't know, maybe it was a 6.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then she eats sardines for a whole month.
Okay, now we're talking.
And then
Now we're
then she did it again, and it came back at mermaid level. It was like
like,
13.
yeah. Yeah.
and and she
Seriously.
lost the weight. She had really struggled with this, some psychological. I mean, the
Mhm.
eating problems are almost all linked to mental health issues, right? They're
Mhm.
lonely, they're depressed, they're bored, and so as she was working through a lot of those mental health issues, just eating sardines because it took out the options. This is just what I do.
Mhm.
as she said, she's just found so much appreciation for, the other places she was getting pleasure in her life. And then she checked it and she had this great number, and then she went back to her normal life and maybe had sardines a few times a week. And then life happened and she put on some weight, and she comes back
Yeah.
maybe it was a year later, and said, okay, I'm going to have to quit my job because this plantar fasciitis is so bad.
Oh,
I'm a cop or a security guard, and I
yeah.
have to walk about 8 miles on my shift every night, and I can't walk. And she goes, before I quit my job, I'm just going to do sardines for 3 months. And
And
again,
that's all she eats. She just has
well, and
sardines,
again, it's
or
at the
does she have?
beginning. So I said, oh, we're going to do some tests this time.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we're
yeah.
going to check your arsenic level and your lead
Mhm.
level and all these things where they say you're getting all these nasty things from those little fish. And of
Yeah.
course, we did an omega-3. And this time, it'd been a year, probably a year and a half since the first time she did that challenge. And so her omega-3 index had come down to probably only a 9, which is
Yeah.
not bad
Not bad at
because
all.
she
Still
continued.
quite good.
Yeah,
But she still
right.
she was having sardines 2 or 3
2 or 3
times a
times
week,
a
you said,
week.
Oh, yeah.
which
And
is
I
she's
contend
maintaining a bit.
when I watch patients who are taking supplements, and vitamin D is my favorite example because I can show this really quickly. When insulin is ruling your body, those fat-based substances, well, they go into storage. They go with everything else.
Mm.
They're going to be ruled by insulin, and they go in
Yeah.
the other corner. They don't get to your bone marrow where you make a red blood cell from it. So to know that she had sustained that 2 to 3 cans a week, I mean, I thought I didn't expect it to be that high, but it
Right.
really reinforced that absorption of nutrient-dense food when your body's healthy is really efficient.
Yeah.
And then your body likes to use this little turkey, so if it's available and the insulin's not on overload, it really does
Interesting.
get efficiently used. So anyway, she does the 100 days, and it must be the top that in fact, I wrote into your company and said, have you ever seen anyone higher than this? Because came back at mermaid level again. I think it was almost 15% that
Yeah.
at 100 days. And
No.
her plantar fasciitis went away and has
Yeah.
not come back. So
Well,
that,
Wow.
really powerful stories of saying, using little fish, great idea. Using little fish and knowing that you can measure what it's doing on the inside and how much better the body works when they can maintain, being in ketosis for the rest of your life. I'm gonna lean towards that. I want to see that in my body. But when they're insulin resistant, putting that goal out there for them can feel daunting.
Yeah.
It's like telling somebody with their 3rd DUI that you're never going to drink again.
Right.
It's like they get a depression.
yeah. So how do people handle the lifestyle of eating a ketogenic diet, socially?
Yeah, I'll be way better than they did in 2015. Uh, the
More products
you know
available?
the say that again.
More products are available for them? More choices?
I think there's more community members, more
Oh.
people doing it is probably the first place. When you're on chemotherapy and you go to the oncologist and you sit in that chair, what happens with the other people around you is they're in your therapy session.
Yeah.
Going through a life experience and having colleagues, having friends is a huge part of sustainability for any life change, whether or not you want the life change, whether it's chemotherapy or ketogenic diet. So I think one of the things that we work really hard on at the class is we're creating those small groups that you guys are going to own at the end of this 3 weeks. We want you leaning into one another, but having at least one person in the universe who's also looking at their morning fasting blood sugar, morning fasting ketones. These are not, crazy metrics to be looking at, and you don't need me to do that. But as soon as you start to make up the rules on your own, or you say, I'm healthy enough to deal with that, and their morning fasting blood sugar goes from the 85 or 90 that we were able to achieve in the class, and now it's back up to 105. And why? Because they're eating at 7 o'clock at night again, and they're doing the things that their body is not healthy enough for.
Yeah.
So when I look at sustainability for the ketogenic diet, first of all, you're going to need, oopsie, sorry.
That's okay.
You're going to need the improvement you'll see in a class. I mean, you're going to take your skill set up a little. Like this is a new goal, but you also need a mirror to look at. So somebody in your class saying, "Oh, they made that mistake too," and then they got back on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, some of the things that maybe I was just designed to teach this class, and
Yeah.
I come from a dynasty of hog farmers. So you look at, the summer sausage. You look at the meats that were, too high fat for anybody to stay on forever. And it's not that we don't address that, but there's a reason that the sardine challenge is in the middle of the class to say it's not the only thing you should be eating. We do want those fats that are omega-3 and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
come from fish.
Right.
Yeah. I like how you use numbers is really important. And that's a lot of what we're doing is people will often say, well, I think I'm eating enough. I think I'm eating fish. But having that really clear number of what's actually going on in your body and what you said about insulin potentially also being a varying factor for the amount of omega-3s that get into the red cell. It's another reason to actually test it and then retest in the future. And then you have that proof to yourself. And for the glucose and ketones, it's every morning, or the scale, it's every morning that
Yeah.
you can really be truer to yourself than how you're feeling. If you are within a safer space where you have a community with that. And it's there's some judgment taken out of it, but it's powerful for yourself.
That's
I don't know. I
objective,
think it's
right?
really good.
Patients come and say, "Is this krill oil gonna raise is it gonna help me?" And you look at the brand and say, "I've never seen that before. I don't know." And it's like,
Right.
well, do an experiment, check it.
Yeah.
And what you're checking in that moment isn't just, are they taking the pill? They'll tell you if they're taking the pill. And they think they're getting all these benefits. But if their insulin is overruling every molecule of their fat that they consume, well, I don't care how good a brand the krill oil is. You got to start with the metabolic state that you've got, and that responsibility becomes with educating how do you manipulate that. So I found that most physicians now have to have a resource to look at supplement number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Doc, which one should I take? And you kind of just roll your eyes because it is a heavy thing to try and keep up with. But not when it comes to omega-3. You're like, no, just measure it.
Just measure it.
Exactly. And part of what I'm measuring is you, the patient, and part of what I'm measuring is that product. And we can put blame where you want, but
Interesting.
I don't get to argue with sardines. I'm like, there's omega-3s in sardines, and they're right there, and your body's designed to absorb them. And your metabolism will be better if you eat those.
Yeah.
Not over cracker.
Wow.
They're kind of a perfect little omega-3 protein, calcium, vitamin D package. You just have to learn how to like them. That's actually a goal of mine, is to learn to like sardines, find a better recipe for it. Because there's people always think you have to be on a supplement to get to 8%, and it's really not true. You can easily get there with fish.
I get letters all the time because I tell people to do this, right? And they'll say, I'm only eating, 2 cans a week. My metabolism is good. My A1C is down. And my omega-3 is 11, 12.
Yeah, really.
I think that's really high.
That is really good. Yeah. For 3 times a week, that's excellent.
Yeah. So I do think
they have a lot of things going.
Efficiency of absorbing once you get that metabolic state out of, so many cytokines go away, and let's get back to a healthier version.
Yeah. So have you, I don't know, it just sounds like the sardines are going to confuse this thing, but what's the effect of a ketogenic diet that's not omega-3 rich on fatty acid profile, on omega-3 levels? Do you know?
So, so you can take me on the seasons where I've been good at sardines and where I haven't. When I'm good at sardines, I'll get mine up to I just did it again last week, but I haven't had sardines since February, which is when I did the class.
Well,
I blame Hurricane Homeless, which happened to me here in Florida. But truthfully, I could have eaten sardines.
Right.
But you look at that, and so my numbers, when I am, less sardines in my menu, but they're still not terrible. They're like at a 6.
Yeah.
So for me, when I do nothing, it's at a 4.
Okay.
Right. And before, when I was, probably as insulin resistant as every other 50-year-old woman who has had 3 babies and 30 pounds that didn't belong, those, I think I even had a 3.8 once.
Whoa, pushing
Yeah.
vegan here, pushing vegan.
Right. It's terrible. And so I'm having all those high fat, I eat steak and would do whatever I was doing, but I wasn't in a ketogenic state in those seasons. And then going keto, obviously the exposure to, you know, um, you know, a persistent ketogenic state, allows you to, I've seen that my numbers kind of went up to that 6 level, but I wasn't supplementing and I would have sardines very rarely. So I actually think, when I look at vitamin D, so I use something that I check more frequently than the omega-6 in parallel to explain what I think happens. When somebody comes into me and their vitamin D is 20, 20, 20, and I'm giving them the prescription strength 50,000 units 3 times a week for 6 weeks, and it comes back in and it's 20. I mean, I know the source of the vitamin D. They aren't absorbing it, or as soon as that vitamin D got in circulation, it went into fat because they're, really inflamed. And so I had hardly thought of the third option until I had a patient say, all right, I'm going to go through a strict ketogenic season again. I'm back on board. And I said, you struggled with your vitamin D. It's in that high teens. I'll buy you 6 vitamin D tests to check it over the next 6 weeks. I want you to check it every week. And the first couple were at 19, but she's in a full state of ketosis. Morning ketones are 1.9, 2.1. Blood sugars are, dipping down into the 80s, which is really good for her. By the 3rd week, we're in the 30s. By the 6th week, she's in the 80s.
Really?
She's not taking any supplement vitamin D.
Yes.
So it's coming out of the adipose tissue.
Exactly. So when I'm looking at folks that are losing weight, it's, you can't account for this. So I don't talk about it much with my patients, but I know they're mobilizing testosterone, estrogen, the fats that you've been storing and have been under that, storage rule of high insulin, like vitamin D, like omega-3s. Well, they finally get to go to where they're supposed to, which is
Interesting. Wow.
That is so interesting. And that also, because we do vitamin D tests and sometimes they come back and it's like, this doesn't make sense. What's the key? And that's yet another thing to ask about is like weight status, insulin status, as well as they know. Because it's the same with omega-3. Sometimes it's just they're taking it, they don't absorb it because they're not eating with food. It's just like there are a couple of variables beyond the dose that can really affect an individual's response. And to be able to explain that, I think also really helps the individual it feel better about it.
Yeah, because they start to have they start to lose hope that what you're telling them is ever going to work. Getting back to that, you're really a salesman in the world of medicine. And when you do these intervention changes, do you know how many times I wrote on a prescription pad, you need to exercise 3 times a week because the American Medical Association said that if I wrote it on a prescription, it was going to work better? It did not.
It didn't.
And I felt like a fool doing it after like the 5th year. And so did the patients didn't listen to me because they expected failure from that approach. So when you're looking at, selling them on an intervention and you can say, watch what's going to happen in the next, vitamin D is an easy one. Omega-3 is just more expensive for them to check it that often. So I back off on that. And
it's slower.
Yeah.
It's
slower.
It's not a concentration. So it's going to take longer. But it's still a really interesting way to use omega-3 testing and vitamin D testing. And we've just enjoyed having you as one of our champions and a clinician that we always feel like we can reach out to if we have questions about our testing. And it's been so good to hear all the stories. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about?
I always like to leave Bill by asking this question. Bill, what's your omega-3 these days?
Still about 10.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Without sardines.
So I like goals. And so one of the goals I wrote down probably about 2 years ago, an omega-3 like Bill Harris. and I haven't gotten to 10 yet. So
Well, yeah.
Well, after your next sardine challenge,
There you
then
Right.
maybe you could do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
well, guys, I
All right.
appreciate it. And this was a great to be on your case. I want to make sure that you hear me say one more time, I love what your company does. Thanks for helping me help all the folks that I teach and I take care of.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Bye.